I don't need this.
That was so aggressive.
It fell off. It unmagnetized, and so it was far more dramatic than it meant to be. Sorry, but
All right, here we go. Well, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further in hopes that it becomes helpful for you and your life and your faith. I'm your host, Jeremy, and I'm sitting here with Buck Giebelhaus. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well. But Buck, how you doing this morning?
I'm all right. I am just plugging. I'm telling you, this week, I don't know what's going on with my sleep, but I'm having these like really funky dreams, like just odd and emotionally like charging dreams, and about my children. And then last night I had this dream about a guy who passed away, and I was having like breakfast with him, and then he like was talking about, hey, we're on this side, but I'm on that side, but I'm on this side temporarily with you, but hey, it's just a crossing over, no big deal. And I was like, it's a pretty big deal. Like,
those are some funky dreams, man.
That's what I'm talking about. And so I'm like, am I eating something different? I don't know what's going on. And so, I took melatonin last night, so maybe that was it.
Oh, yeah. When I take melatonin.
Do you have funky dreams?
Oh, I have like vivid funky dreams.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I take melatonin only when I'm like pretty wired and I know I need to go to sleep.
Well, the problem is with Jill and I in our season is our boys stay up till like 4 a.m. Not really, but kind of.
Yeah.
And then, one of our boys has got to get up like at 6. So like, and we were told this when we were first having kids, like when your kids turn teenagers, like the most opportune time to talk to them is between like 11 and 1 a.m.
Oh my god!
Because then like they're open to talk. They're like, hey mom, dad, let me tell you about what's going on in life. and as a parent, you're exhausted. So this is like a really interesting dynamic for us. And, Jill and I, because we've got, our older boys, they're up and they're like, they went to work out last night at 9:30 p.m.
I was trying to fall asleep at 9:30 p.m.
Yeah, so they're meeting their buddies at Gold's Gym, and then they're coming home at 10:45, and I'm like, man, I got to get up early, and then then they're talking cars and talking all, anyways.
Oh my goodness.
So to answer your questions, I think I'm doing okay. I'm having some odd dreams, and with the few hours of sleep I did get, they were pretty good outside of the dream.
Man. That is wild.
Yeah.
I'm terrified to have teenagers.
Good Lord.
Yeah. I mean, I was terrified before we started the podcast, and now I'm like really out of luck.
Yeah.
Because I am 100% a morning person, not a night owl at all. Yeah. So I'll have to learn and adjust. Maybe culture's different. Maybe culture by that point in like 13 years when I have a teenager.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like they love to talk at like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Sure. They're early birds then.
Yeah. That'd be fantastic.
Okay. Well,
yeah, it's not gonna happen.
Keep hoping for that one.
Thanks. Yeah. So you talked a lot on Sunday about the car situation at your house and the like just process of working on old cars, and the boys are turning 16, and I mean it's crazy. You have a 18, 17, and 16, and so like 3 years ago this was not even a thing.
No.
And then now all of a sudden it's like they're all driving, and it's just wild, and so.
Yeah, this is a whole new season.
Yeah, so tell me what's the latest. Give me like an update on what is going on with the car situation. Because when you talked on Sunday, you talked about watching the Mustang drive off, and that was an emotional moment.
It totally was, and it was shockingly emotional to the degree of emotion. Like I thought, it may be a little bit sad, but I was like, I think I got to go inside and cry.
Yeah.
So since then, I've been looking at different cars, and I like the classic kind of car because insurance purposes and then inspection purposes and all those kind of things. And I'm 5 miles from work, so I don't drive it that much. So, and it gives me something to work on the boys with and tinker with and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking. And, I've done the Mustang thing, and Sam's still doing the Mustang thing. And then Luke is about to buy a Mustang with, as I talked about, I'm grateful for Jill's dad, their grandparents, because otherwise they'd ride bicycles, but now they get to drive these really cool cars. Yeah. So anyways, I've been looking like classic, and I was like, what if I switch from Ford to Chevy? So you have like the Chevy Camaro, But the old classic Chevy Camaros, they remind me too much of the Mustang, and I'm really more of a Ford Mustang, like classic Mustang. Like if I'm going to get like a 60s car, I'm going to get
go Mustang.
I really like the Mustang. So then I started thinking, well, what other classic cars? And Jill's dad, one of the reasons why he gave Sam the 69 Mustang is because he got into Corvettes.
Classic Corvettes?
No.
Newer ones?
Yeah, newer, fancy, very expensive ones.
Yeah.
And so it's so funny because he's got all these back issues, but he gets into this, I think it's a 2019 or 18 or...
Those sit so low to the ground,
They're
don't they?
so low. So he's got these back issues, but he bought like the worst possible car for, I think, back issues. I'm guessing. I don't know. It seems because, like you said, they're so low. So anyways, long story short, I've been looking at those, and because I've driven his, and his are just like unbelievable. But there's just no way I could afford them. But when you look at classic Corvettes, they're like very affordable. And so I took my insurance check, and was able to buy a 1995 classic Corvette, and have money left over to do some fixing up. So I've got some plans like to start working on it. Nice. With the boys, and it also creates some tension because I'm a pastor, and driving. I told you this before the podcast, but driving back, we bought it in Temple. Driving back, there's this like feeling of, is this like midlife crisis? Like I'm 45, I'm driving a classic Corvette. Like, should I like unbutton my shirt, let my hair on my chest come out, get some gold chains? So, Jill and I were having to laugh about it, but I'm excited. It's, it's fun. It's just, it seems like a car that, it's kind of a new season. The boys and I can work on it. Sam's super excited because he's into the motors in it's C4 Corvette. And so he's into all the motors and all that stuff. So he's excited to work on it. And,
nice.
And then, of course, I'm going to be that goofy pastor that's like, oh, there he goes.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with him?
You can spot him out in the community.
Yeah. So that's the latest and greatest. It's a pretty big switch, but it has an air conditioner.
That's fantastic.
Which is awesome with summer coming up. And because my Mustang did not. And it's it's all somewhat functional. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit nervous. I heard some sounds and ticks, and so I'm going to bring it to mechanic and see what the deal is.
Check it out. That's cool.
Anyways, that's it.
Well, it was funny. It was funny this morning. Like Jill had mentioned it to me because y'all were figuring it all out yesterday.
Yeah.
And then I was just out in front of the parking lot of the building this morning, and I just see this like white car just comes zooming in, and then
white streak.
Yep, I just see you in it, and I'm like, man, that car and his hair are like, they just go hand in hand. They are perfect together.
I know. Again, it's terrible for perception.
Yeah,
like if I'm on the other side of me and I see this dude, middle-aged guy with tall hair, get out of a Corvette. And he's like, I'm a pastor. I'm like, all right, so.
I'm going to run away.
I know. Yeah, so, there's always a little bit of tension with all that stuff. Yeah. But I'm excited. I think it'll be a lot of fun. And, Jill and I are in this, like I mentioned too, all our boys are getting these cars. So we don't need, like, she drives a Suburban. And we've needed that. And we still do, like when we all go to dinner or something like that. But, today it's so much they meet us at the restaurant. They're all with their buddies and, driving their own cars. And so this is kind of fun because, like, we're thinking, like, date nights. We're thinking going down to, like, the Georgetown Square, driving the, classic Corvette. And, so we're excited about that. And
that's pretty fun.
See how all that goes.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, on Sunday, you talked a third installment of the series we're in. You've Got a Friend in Me. And we've been saying throughout the series, your quality of life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. Mm-hmm. And you took that to talk about, well, if you want quality relationships, you need to spend quality time to make those quality relationships a thing, make those possible. You talked about scheduling our priorities. So not there was a Stephen Covey quote in there, and I can't remember it exactly, but it was something along the lines of don't prioritize your schedule, but schedule your priorities was kind of the concept. Oh, that was it. Perfect. Awesome. And it was a great message. I think there was a lot of great insights. I'm curious because you kind of shared a little bit on Sunday of your own personal priorities, but can you give a little bit of insight into your priorities and perhaps how you've changed over the years how you schedule those things?
Yeah, I think
And why? Because I know there's probably some moments
Sure.
and things that you've come across.
Yeah, I think, I alluded to this a little bit on Sunday, but it'll give more context, is that, this is an area I've struggled. I've prioritized the wrong things a lot in my life. And so I think, I don't know, 10 years ago, something like that, I read a book by Stanley, and at the time it was titled Choosing to Cheat, and, kind of a goofy title. And now it's titled, and I highly recommend it for people listening to this podcast, is called When Work and Family Collide. It's a very simple book, very practical, very helpful, very straightforward, and it really helps you discern how to begin to prioritize. And so I've had the privilege to connect with Andy because we're partners with North Point Atlanta, kind of the North Point, there's tons of churches all around the world. And so, and hear him talk personally about some of his disciplines and his priorities in life. And that was probably about 10 years ago, which was super influential for me. And so when I heard that, what I heard from him is he said, when he started North Point Atlanta, which there's no connection with names, it's whole different backstories, how we got our name and they got our name, just kind of coincidence. But when he started North Point Atlanta, he said, God, I can give 45 hours at best to the church. And however far you want to go with that, however big a church you want to build, however many people you want to influence, fantastic. But I will not cheat my wife and my kids for the sake of work. And I had never heard that kind of terminology up until that point. And so before that, work was my priority. And I worked, like, when we started North Point, like, legitimate for months and months and months on end every single day. And I would have pockets of time, but it was just every day I'd work. And there were emails, there were people to see. We were trying to survive as a church and, get started and, figure things out. And my livelihood was dependent upon it. And, Jill and I kind of went all in when I transitioned from Dell and, did a lot of things to help start North Point with an incredible group of people. And so I was working and working and working and working. And my kids were small, and they were all, like, I think we had, 5 kids, 6 and under. So that was insane.
My
but we,
goodness.
had twins at the end. And so, but it was like, Jill's got the kids, and I'm going to work. And so that felt like the right thing at the time. But I could see Jill struggling. And just for a practical reason, 5 kids, 6 and under. That's a practical reason. But just struggling as a mom, struggling to go, like, to honor and say, hey, emotionally, like, I want to, I get the church and I get, we're doing a good thing together. But you're kind of, leading the thing and, I'm leading our family and, like, let's do this dynamic. And so we're doing this, like, that was our life, and there's a distance between Jill and I. Some of that's practical because, when you got babies and diapers and you're not sleeping, it's just season. It's a season. That's really important to understand. But, like, that's happening, but then it's being exacerbated because I'm gone and I'm prioritizing work and work and work. And then, with the boys, I'm thinking, well, as they get older, I'll spend time with them. But then I start reading things like 50% of so many of their, like, mannerisms, so much of their thinking, so much of their behavior is going to be formed by the age of 5. And I read a stat like that in terms of, like, their psychological and physiological development, and going, oh my gosh, like, and if I need to be present, it's then. It's always, but it's like, gosh, I just didn't know that. I was like, oh, they'll be fine, and then I'll engage. Like, they need the security of a father. They need the wisdom of a father. They need the masculinity of a father. And I was just gone and gone and gone. And they need the stability and the support of a healthy marriage. Like, one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids is not like, oh my gosh, let's go entertain and have fun and let me, take you to breakfast. All those things are fine, so I'm not knocking those. But when they see the stability of a marriage, it gives them the security as a son or daughter. When they see the insecurity and the instability of a marriage, it translates deeply into who they are. And you can't get away from that. And so all of that was at play. And it was starting to, like, I was feeling it. And then Andy comes along and he's like, man, you got to choose to cheat. Why would you trade what's so unique to you, being a father, being a husband, for something that someone else is eventually going to do, which somebody else is going to eventually lead North Point? Somebody else is eventually going to teach. I mean, Jordan is a far better teacher than me. and I'm like, and you, my goodness, like, on the other, I'm just like, you're the future. Like, and you're going to be far, far better than, I've ever been. And so I'm like, what am I doing? And then, with the things I'm reading on the development of kids. And so at that point, I took a cue from Andy and I sat down with Jill and I said, babe, what does it look like to prioritize our marriage and our family with all the demands of work? And she said a very similar thing that Sandra Stanley said to Andy Stanley. She said, if you can come home around 4 o'clock, like that is the critical hour that I'm exhausted, that the kids are, either getting home from school and they're, all the demands, and it's overwhelming at that time. And it would just be a great time to invest in the boys. And she's like, get up at like 3 a.m, but like come home at 4 o'clock. So for me, that's what I did. And I got up, early and had a lot of early morning breakfast. And, I think that's why one of the reasons we met, like, when you were younger and,
yeah, I think I was like, hey, can we meet? And you're like,
6 a.m.
Yeah, I think you said 6 a.m.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, I can meet early. And so so I could get home. And I knew that was the commitment. So that's what it looked like to prioritize Jill. That's what it looked like to prioritize family. And then, to prioritize a date night, like a weekly date night, to prioritize a weekly meeting where Jill and I have, even if it's 30 minutes, let's get on the same page, look at our calendars. It may feel like a business meeting, but you can't get on the same page until you get in the same room. And in a marriage, that is more true than I think in business. Mm-hmm. And so, we began to prioritize our weekly one-on-one, prioritize date nights, and then prioritize me getting home at a certain time and investing in the boys. And that was a game changer. That was so hard because I felt like, oh my gosh, what about the church? Oh my gosh, what about all these people who text or email and they're going to be mad and they're going to leave North Point and all that stuff. But, I learned from Andy that, you should prioritize what's unique to you. Not at the expense of like all of a sudden, like you don't prioritize the thing that you like work and stuff. That's the extreme, and that's not what we're talking about. But prioritize what's unique to you, and then trust God in the gaps in the other, with work. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, "Hey, I'm going to do all this work," and then trust God in the gaps of my family. That's the wrong priority. Mm-hmm. And so, I made that switch and started doing that, and God did incredible things at North Point and filled in a ton of gaps that I felt, guilty or insecure, or my insecurities came out about. And as we've gotten older, I mean, that's changed. Like I alluded to at the beginning, now the boys are, far more independent. And now I just have to, catch them and have a breakfast or have a lunch or go grab a coffee or go on a walk or go work out. Like, Luke and I work out in the mornings. And so it's that's how the priorities have changed because seasons change pretty dramatic with kids.
Sure.
So anyways, that's probably more than you asked, but that's a little bit of my story and how that worked.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Do you feel like, the whole purpose of reprioritizing those things was to increase the quality of relationships with your kiddos, with Jill? Do you feel like, you said that was about 10 years ago, 10 years hindsight, have you seen the changes, the quality of those things increase as a result of prioritizing things differently?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I would say, to quantify that,
It's
kids,
difficult.
It is, but I think to quantify that, here's the thing with pastors, and this gets weird, and their kids and pastors' kids, and I think part of the reason why pastors' kids rebel so much is because dad prioritized the church over them, and that is part of dad. Do you see me? Do I have value? Do I matter in your eyes? Because it seems like the church matters far more than me. So I'm done with the church. I'm out of the church. I'm running from the church. And, I thank God every day. And I'm not saying my kids are like, man, they wake up and they're angels and they're praying and reading the scriptures and memorizing and, oh my gosh, they're, wanting to be missionaries all around. That's not my boys. Sometimes I'm like, I'd like to see them more of that. But they love the church. I mean, Sam was at a NASCAR race on Sunday, and he asked, Dad, can, I not come to church on Sunday and go to the NASCAR race? And, it was cool he asked. And I was like, yeah, I mean, he's 18. So, I was like, yeah, totally. And he left in the middle of the NASCAR race to come to Inside Out. And I thought, Jill and I looked at one another and said, like, that's awesome. That's cool that he did that, like, that he still wants to do that.
Inside Out was that valuable to him?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's, I would say that's one of the tangible things I've seen is that my boys, they get excited to come to church on Sunday. They're serving here at North Point. It's not like they reject. And I don't want to overstate that. They're not like, oh my gosh, the church is, they're always on fire. I mean, we certainly have our conversations. But that's a factor. And then I think for Jill and I mean, I've talked a lot about our relationship in terms of lots of things we've learned in counseling, unpacked a ton of things. And that's been in the course of these 10 years. So if we didn't have the relational margin or the relational priority, I don't know if we would have gotten to the things that really have increased the quality and intimacy of our relationship. But the hard part about those is, and when you get in counseling and start to dig the stuff up, it changes your puzzle piece. In other words, kind of how you fit together relationally. And so all of that's been going on the last 10 years too. So that's been hard relationally, the ups and downs of that, but we've created the margin to be able to do that because we prioritized our relationship.
Sure.
And so today, like I've said, like with my dad, today with Jill, with the boys, the quality of relationship is better than it's ever been, but there's still definite seasons and bumps and difficulties and gaps that I'm like, it's difficult. So
yeah, I think there's, as I hear you talk through all this, I think there's two different, perhaps people are listening, and there's maybe some what about kind of questions that pop up. One, maybe a little bit more from my perspective. Ashley is pregnant with our first kid, and I think that I'm thinking about all of this a lot. I mean, you and I had a conversation I think 2 days ago about I'm thinking about how we're going to change things up and new dynamic of life and stuff like that. But for the past 5 years, we have not had kids. And so, when you don't have kids, you're prioritizing each other, but it's easier to do that because, it's literally just one human versus 6 humans in your case. You know what I mean? So what would you say to somebody who's more young, single or young married in terms of how they prioritize? Because they can go work 60, 70 hours a week. And it's not as big of a cost to the relationships in their life, or maybe on the surface, what would you say if somebody's going, okay, what about me? I don't have a family. I don't have this. Like, how do I create time and margin for quality relationships, even though I don't necessarily have those? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think. Well, tell me if I'm hearing you right. So what I said on Sunday is the first question to answer is, what are my top priorities? What are they? And so I would say, I would really encourage, if you're a Christian or not, like, make God your priority. Like, go discover him. Go answer fill the gaps of the questions that you have. If you're not a follower of Jesus, like, really get to the bottom of who he is. I think that's the greatest question you could ask in life. Who is Jesus? And honestly, like, as much as you can without your bias and without, just be intellectually honest and go chase after that question. Because I think when you get to the bottom of it, you're going to discover something wonderful and something you'd hope for. But you came to an intellectual place to go like, okay, it's true. So I would say you got to pick your priority. So if you're going to schedule God or prioritize God, if you're going to prioritize a marriage, you're going to prioritize friends. Friends are critical in that, and especially in the early season. I think, prioritize maybe what you want to do, something transcendent. So I want to do something in the community. I want to do something in the city, in my neighborhood. I want to get to know my neighbors. I want to invest in their lives.
Do something at church.
Yeah, see who they are. Ministries. I want to go, serve wherever. I think you prioritize that, and this is not in order because you've got to prioritize your marriage as well, and really build a strong foundation. My goodness, there's so much to discover. I've said it on Sunday. Your wife is like Lady Wisdom, and she is this bottomless well of wisdom and insight. And if you're willing to, you can discover something new every day. And like, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, how would you approach this? Hey, how would you fix this? How would you speak into this? I mean, so many things. And so when you create that list of priorities, you may be able to have more margin to work, if you will, because you're not prioritizing kids at that season. But there's things that are still incredibly important. So, hey, instead of waking up and jumping on my email and text and getting to work, I'm going to wake up and spend some time with the Lord, and I'm going to make that a priority. And that's going to be 30 minutes or an hour or, 5 minutes or, whatever it is. But man, now that is taking some time. Hey, I'm going to check in on my ministry or, the area that I'm serving or the area that I want to make the world a better place. So, let me think about that. I'm going to invite God in to those areas. And then, you're thinking about your relationships and thinking about your work and your goals and ambitions. And so I just think, again, it's, I'd just point back to what I said on Sunday. Just, you got to pick your priorities. And if you don't know them, then your schedule's going to drive you. And then you're going to wake up 5 years after being married, and you're going to look back. And I think in hindsight, you're going to go, man, I wish I would have prioritized the important. Because what I ended up doing was prioritizing like busyness and making money and getting things done. But the quality of your relationships with God, the quality of your relationships with friends, the quality of relationship with your wife could have gotten so much more in depth and so much more discoveries and so much more in terms of like the proverb kind of friend. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. You need friends in your life that just can ask soulless questions and can hold you accountable and encourage the socks off you all at the same time. That takes an enormous amount of intentional time. And not just going to the ball game and, going to a restaurant, drinking a beer, whatever.
Talking about weather, sports.
Yeah, great. But you got to get to like soulish level stuff. Like, hey, tell me how you're really doing. No. I'm not going to let you escape that question.
How's your marriage doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, those kind of questions.
How's your marriage? Hey, how's your time with God? Like, what's the quality of your relationship with God? What questions do you have for him? Like, what books are you reading? Hey, do you want to read a book? I mean, there's so many things. So if you don't prioritize it, your schedule will prioritize you.
Yeah.
And then you'll wake up 5 years from now. And in hindsight, you'll go, man, the quality of my relationships require quality time, and I didn't intentionally prioritize that quality time.
And, probably not speaking from experience, but I would imagine it's much harder to get in the habit of prioritizing your, the most important things when you do have a ton of kiddos running around. And, like you said, like you made that change when you had 5 that were 6 and under. Like I can't imagine how much, difficult that would have been to think through all of that and have those conversations. But if you have that foundation and 5 years of like scheduling the right things, that's really helpful when you do jump into those seasons where it's much more difficult.
100%. And here's a little side note as you were talking. On Sunday I mentioned weddings, and I had a wedding Saturday night and then a wedding like 2 weeks ago. And I don't do that many weddings typically. They just all kind of converged.
Yeah.
But I love them. And I love the people who are getting married. And that makes it so much more meaningful for me, to look in their eyes and be able to say like, man, I've spent time with you. I know you. Like your eyes are open for this moment. And I shared with you, like, Saturday night, I forgot the wedding rings, which is I've never done that. Super embarrassing moment. Like right in the middle of the wedding, there's like 170 people.
Oh my goodness.
We're crammed in this room. Totally not great for COVID, but
yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I was like, right in the middle of the wedding, I was like, okay, this is going to be a little bit embarrassing. We're going to have to pause. And I said, I totally forgot the wedding rings. And everybody's like, what? But it all worked out really well. So my point with this story, otherwise I'll get too distracted, is Jill and I have done premarital with a couple I just married, and we did premarital with you guys. And one of the things, we just beat this drum like no tomorrow. We said, have your weekly meeting. Have your weekly meeting. To get on the same page, you got to get in the same room and have a meeting, and it may feel a little bit businesslike, but the beauty of that is it keeps your priorities front and center, because you sit down and you're intentional and you look at a spreadsheet maybe, or you look at your calendar and you're like, okay, what do we have coming up? How do I prioritize the kids? Hey, I'd like to take, Sam to lunch. Can you cover these 3 things? Yeah, because I want to, that's the way I'm going to prioritize him, that quality time with him. Hey, when can we have our date night this week? We look at our calendars, do all that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you, that weekly meeting, the flinch to that is, oh, that doesn't feel relational. That doesn't feel personal. It doesn't feel intimate. It may not, but it's like the thing that produces those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, we're aligned. We're on the same page. We're synced up. I'm able to reflect like that question. Hey, what's it like on the other side of me? Part 2 of this series. You can ask it in that moment. Hey, this week, what's it been like on the other side of me? It's a great place. So if you carve 45 minutes, on once a week to sit down with your spouse and just say, or in a relationship and just say, hey, what's going on? Let's prioritize the important. And that keeps it front and center, to have that regular kind of systematic time. And that could be once every 2 weeks or once a month, but just some regular time to keep it front and center of what's important.
Yeah. And I'd also add on to that, I think that this is where I think in a marriage relationship, like a man kind of really needs to step up and lead, to go like, I'm putting in this on the calendar. Hey, we're going to sit down. We're going to, be the leader of the relationship and make it happen. Because I've noticed that when we get lackadaisical with our weekly meeting and, oh my goodness, 3 weeks went by, we didn't, and I'm like, oh, it's my fault. Like, I just never, Ashley's like, yeah, I was wondering about that. And she just wanted me to lead, in that moment. And I think that was I think that's really important for like a guy to go like, I'm going to lead in this area, you know?
Well, this is like, you just gave the guys who are listening who are married or maybe even in a dating relationship and moving towards that or whatever, like you just gave them a great relational tip to potentially make, their spouse like, or, the person they're dating all like, oh my gosh, you are
points.
So sexy right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you want to schedule a meeting to talk?
Yeah.
To hear from me, discover me?
Yeah.
See, right? This is relational gold.
Yeah, it goes well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
So thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, anytime. I think there's, we're going to wrap up. I have one more question on what you were talking about. So there's the category of people that are perhaps not married, don't have kids. And then there's the category that are like you had 5 kids. And for some people too, it's like, you had the ability to say, I'm going to go to work at 6 a.m. and I'm going to come home at 4. Some people have set in stone schedule. They go to work at 8. They got to come home at 6. Some people, they work nights. They got to provide. They got, finances are important. They got to provide for their family. That's a tension. What would you say to those people who go, but Buck, I would love to, but I don't know if I have, flexibility. I don't know if I can do that right now in this season, especially with COVID and the economy and all, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, I'd just say, I get it. I get it. There's the ideal that we can speak to, and then the real, which perhaps if you're listening, you're experiencing. And you're like, okay, this sounds great, ideally, but I'm living in reality. Like, come on, help me. And I get it. And here's what I would say. I would say that I've taught this message before, but there's a message that I unpack the scripture of Daniel. And Daniel lived 600 plus years before Jesus, and he's in Babylon, this whole thing. And he had to pick, and I called it the Daniel dilemma. And Andy talks about this in his book. And it's he couldn't have it both ways. He couldn't satisfy the king, and he couldn't satisfy the God of Israel, and so he had to pick. And he picked, and then the scripture goes on to say, now God. In other words, God filled in the gaps. God provided. God showed up in a way because Daniel trusted him in a very significant manner.
With his life, it
could have cost him his life, yeah. So, even to that extreme. And I want to be careful with the extremes here. But I think what I would say is, you got to have the convo with your family in terms of what it looks like to prioritize. So maybe it looks like, hey, more of a morning priority. You got to deal with the reality of what is. But I also would encourage that if it comes to it, it may look like a really awkward, hard conversation that you got to pray big time leading into the conversation, invite God into with your boss. And I've had this conversation before with multiple people, with our elders here and so on. And I've encouraged people to have this conversation, and the outcome typically has been pretty cool. And even with bosses that are like, oh, my boss would never get this, my boss would never understand. But, to sit down with your boss and just say, listen, I am committed to the vision and mission. I'm committed to, the organization. I want to make this organization shine. I want to do, be responsible in my role. But I can only give you X amount of hours, or I have to go home at 4:30. So I don't mind getting here earlier. I don't mind, but having that hard conversation, setting some boundaries, and inviting God into that, you may be surprised how God does show up. And I think that potentially could be an outcome of what you're talking about. I think first you got to understand what the priorities are, what practically that could look like. Maybe there's other times you can schedule and go, hey, this is when we can, with the kids or date night, so on. But I think a hard conversation with your boss would be a potential outcome, or a potential outcome could, and this is more extreme, would get another job. Because again, the statement I made, why would you trade what's so unique to you for something someone else will eventually do? There's only one dad to your kids. There's only one husband to your wife, your first wife, right? So it's like, that's my wife, that's my husband, that's my kids. There's only one mom to her kids. So it's like, okay, it's a now God moment. God, I don't know how this is all going to work out. How are we going to pay the bills? All this kind of stuff. I'm not saying to get extreme and flippant and make these super rash decisions. Like, come meet with a pastor here at North Point. Meet with a counselor. Get wise counsel before you make these decisions. Invite God into it. But the outcomes could be, well, just a rearranging our schedule, reprioritizing like, hey, it's not evenings, it's mornings or it's afternoons because your work schedule and you got to provide. I get it. It could look like having a really hard conversation with your boss, or a possible outcome could go, I got to start looking for another job. I can't keep cheating my family. Can't do it. It's not worth it. You will regret it. And a thing I say to people all the time when they're like, hey, Buck, what should I do? I'm like, well, I just don't think you'll regret going to spend that time. I just don't think you'll look back 5 years from now with regret. I mean, we've had this conversation. Yeah. I'm like, just fast forward 5 years from now, look back and go, I'm just not, I may live in a nicer house, drive nicer cars, have nicer toys, have nicer vacations. Who cares? Like at the end of the day, like you're going to be so fulfilled in life if you have a connection with your son, your daughter. If your marriage is richer and more meaningful, more intimate.
Your relationship with God is growing and flourishing.
100%.
Yeah.
Those are the things you will not regret. And I've just talked to too many men and women that on the other side of, choosing to cheat their family for the sake of their job or for the sake of the almighty dollar. It's not a great story. And so I think wherever you're at, I think the beauty is with God, God's a God who redeems. You can always start today. And it's certainly, it's certainly not too late. And even if like your career's over and you're retired and, you cheated your family when they were young for your career, I mean, an apology goes miles and miles and miles with your kiddos. Brene Brown says the most teachable moments are when parents are most vulnerable and apologize to their kids. And so I think, it's never too late. You can start to prioritize the right things, the important things today.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great way to end the podcast. That was good. We're going to be jumping into part 4 of You've Got a Friend in Me this week. And I'm excited for the topic because it's just another key in what it means to have great relationships. So, Buck, thank you so much for being on today.
Awesome. Thank you.